I'm James Barfield with your Urban Connection. And remember, this is the channel that is often imitated, but is never duplicated. Now, one thing I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, is, the reason I say we're never duplicated, because no other media, not the electronic media, nor the print media, nor any other media, will talk about the things that we talk about here on your Urban Connection. So I want you to consider this, and I want you to think about this. It's very important that you support Black-owned media, because some of the stories, many of the stories that you're going to find and get on Black-owned media, you won't get on mainstream media. Now, let me make my point very clear. My topic tonight was the biggest event in the state of Kansas for the Martin Luther King celebration that was sponsored by and put on by the Wichita Ministerial League. And they had as their keynote speaker a fine, well-known journalist who's worked for CNN, MSNBC, News One, and several other professional news outlets. But if you would look to find the name Roland Martin on any mainstream media in the city of Wichita, you won't find it. Now, let me make sure you understand this. The media, electronic media, at least I know, were in attendance at that event for a short period of time. You see, they came not to cover the keynote speaker, Mr. Roland Martin. They came to cover the governor, because the governor was invited to speak. But the governor was not responsible for the gathering of the thousands of people that were in attendance on Monday afternoon. The governor was a side show for the real performance that was put on by Roland Martin, right? So remember, it's very important that you support Black-owned media, such as this very program that you're watching now, right? Now, let me say this. I'm going to get back to the program now. As I said, the program was put on by the Ministerial League, which is a group of African-American and a few white ministers throughout the city. They invited Roland Martin to be the keynote speaker. Now, I'm not so sure they knew what they were getting when they invited Roland Martin. But I've watched Roland Martin since he was on CNN, since his days at MSNBC, and here lately, an awful lot on YouTube. He has his own Black network. Okay? Roland does not bite his tongue. He's not ashamed to speak his mind. He's not afraid to make people uncomfortable. And he doesn't care who you are, what color you are, what your profession is, what your title is. None of that matters to Roland Martin. So what Roland Martin did, and let me just say this also, I'm sure that many in the audience did not have any idea what they were in for when they came to see Roland Martin speak. But I'm going to tell you what they received. Every single one of them. I mean, everybody that was in attendance, everybody that was in the audience received a fiery, blazing message, and I would say inspiring, from Roland Martin. Now, and let me tell you what I mean by that. And you know, Roland will tell you, as he did on Monday, what he's about to do. As a matter of fact, he said to them, before he really got off into his speech, he says, there's going to be some people here. And not all of them are white people. A lot of black people are going to be made to feel uncomfortable with what I have to say. But he went on to say that he is in control of his voice. He is in control of his tongue because of the fact that he does not work for any channel, nor station, nor network. He is the owner of Roland Martin Unfiltered Black Star Network. Nobody controls what Roland Martin has to say. So Roland challenged everybody in the auditorium, okay? And he made some people uncomfortable. But you know, sometimes, folks, you have to be uncomfortable to become inspired. And that's why I say Roland's speech was inspiring to those that he made uncomfortable, as well as those that were comfortable with the speech. But see, what Roland did is Roland challenged everyone in that auditorium to do better. Because what they've been doing for the last 40 years or better is they've been coming to the Martin Luther King celebration, enjoying the activities, the festivities, but not engaging in the message that was left by Dr. Martin Luther King. You see, a lot of people, and the politicians really anger me when they do this, a lot of people can stand before a black crowd and they can recite to you every one of Martin Luther King's speeches. And the one they most often use is the I Have a Dream speech. They can tell you about that. And they can tell you how they love Martin Luther King's teaching and preachings. And then they'll walk right out of that auditorium and go back to their individual communities and do the same thing they've been doing for 40 years, taking black folks for granted, taking Martin Luther King's Day as a day for lip service, and do not give a single thought to the idea of advancing Martin Luther King's dream. Don't do one single thing to make life better for African Americans. And that happens all across the country, not just here in Kansas, that happens all over. So Martin Luther King challenged the so-called leaders in this and other communities. He challenged the preachers, the ministers. He challenged the organizations that have as their mission statement, be the voice of the voiceless, namely African Americans. As a matter of fact, he said this: if you want to pick up the mantle of leadership, then be prepared to lead. And he said, a lot of these so-called leaders cannot even lead their families, but yet they want to be called and looked up to as leaders. He talked about the Greek organizations, the sorority brothers and sisters. He told them that if you like to wear your colors, your pink and green, your white, your blue, your black and gold, but he challenged them to wear those uniforms and wear those colors and go to a city council meeting and advocate for something. Go to a county commission meeting and advocate for something. Go to the Board of Education meetings and advocate for something. Go before the state legislature and advocate for something. Be visible, and not only when the cameras are present. And he challenged the politicians to do what Martin Luther King died doing, and that is advocating and standing up for the African Americans in this country. And let me just tell you, he didn't pull any punches. Governor Laura Kelly, as politicians always do, took to the podium and spoke about, first of all, she spoke about old Martin Luther King and how great he was and how he's so eloquent, his speeches, she loved it. And then she went to talk about what she has done for African Americans and people of color in her first 4 years. She pointed out that she has hired 20% of her cabinet is in those positions have been filled by people of color. Now I want to remind the governor of something right now. You see, the rest of you are not going to remind her, so it's left up to me. See, we don't care about the quantity of people you've hired. We're more concerned with the quality of people that you've hired. But more than that, we're concerned about the policies that you've put in place to make life better and more equal for people of color, and in particular African Americans. You see, Governor, as we speak right now, you sit with a budget surplus of $2 billion. And yet you have the absolute worst African American Affairs Commission in the country. That's right, the absolute worst African American Affairs Commission in the country. You and the commission are in violation of every state statute that pertains to the Kansas African American Affairs Commission right now as I speak. The Kansas African American Affairs Commission is underfunded, understaffed, and underperforms every other African American Affairs Commission in the country. And then you have the audacity to talk about, after the George Floyd murder, that you put in place a group of people mostly African Americans, in forming a diversity, inclusion, and equity task force. And you gave it a 2-year time limit. But then you have the audacity to stand before that mostly African American audience and lie through your teeth in saying that you and your administration have put many of the recommendations the group made in place. That is totally false, inaccurate, misleading, and I have to call it what it is, a lie. You see, Governor, there's not one, but there's 2 Associated Press reports that says that not a single recommendation that came from this task force even received a hearing from the state legislature. Not a single one. And those recommendations require approval of the state legislature. So, Governor, let me explain one thing to you. You will not be allowed to come to Wichita and stand on a stage anywhere in the city and spew that BS and think that you're not being fact checked. Because you are. Now, you might do that in Topeka and get away with it. You might do that in Kansas City and get away with it. But you're not going to do that in Wichita as long as God gives me breath. Okay? I am going to put you on blast any and every time that you come to Wichita spreading that BS, spreading false information, taking Black folks for granted, as you have done for the last 4 years, and you're continuing to do it. Now, I know you have some friends that will buy into your lies. They'll do anything to be friends with you, okay? Some of them you're paying off, you know, with your little grants and things, you know, that's to keep them happy. But you see, a lot of us know the real story. We got the 411 on you, Governor. So anyhow, so Roland talked about politicians who do just what Laura Kelly did, and stand before an African-American crowd and sing the praises of Martin Luther King's speeches, and that's coming from her lips, but yet at the same time her heart, and when I say her, I'm talking about her and these other politicians. I saw Sam Brownback do the same thing when I was on the Kansas African American Affairs Commission at Topeka when they had the Martin Luther King. I saw Sam Brownback do and say the same thing, and then go back across the street to the Capitol and vote against issues and concerns that affect African American people. Time is out for that. Roland Martin lashed out at Governor Kelly for talking about how she's done so much for Black people, but then says she wants to put more money in law enforcement, put more police officers on the street. You know what that means? What it has meant for the last 40 years or 50, it meant more law enforcement officers killing more unarmed Black men. You see, Laura's not talking about police reform. She's not talking about making any changes. No, she wants more officers on the street. Okay? So you see, Roland talked about, and he made a big issue, ladies and gentlemen, about we, and I'm talking about African Americans now, we are not doing what Martin Luther King had dreamed we would be doing. And therefore, we're not seeing the changes that Dr. King was dreaming about. You see, we're enjoying the entertainment. And that's one of the problems that we have. We love to be entertained. But, as Roland said, it's all about economics. It's all about money. You know, there's a cost for entertainment, okay? So if you don't have money, there's not a lot of free entertainment around. And let me just say one other thing to you. Also, one of the things Roland's clearly challenged was for our local politicians to get engaged and not just follow the crowd and attend these ceremonies every year and then go home, go to work, whatever, and for the next 364 days, you do nothing to show that you are willing to follow the path and the pattern that Martin Luther King has set forth to make things different and better for the African Americans in this country. You see, you local politicians, you know, I'm going to tell you something. I don't know when I've heard a state representative, state senator, and I'm talking about African Americans now. I don't know when I've heard them talk about having a visit with, having a talk with the Department of Commerce in Topeka. You know why? Because you see, folks, the Department of Commerce, you know what the word commerce means? The Department of Commerce is one of the most important offices and departments in that state capital. And I don't care what state you're in. You know, we want to know why we're not getting any investments in our communities. Well, the place you start is with the Department of Commerce. You know, we want to know why we don't have any jobs, why we don't have any grocery stores, why we don't have any industry, why we don't have anything that produces jobs and produces income for our residents. And yet, our elected politicians don't dare set a foot in the office of the Department of Commerce and engage in conversation about directing some of the many millions of dollars, billions of dollars that the Secretary of Commerce is involved with to direct some of those dollars into these inner cities, which is clearly lacking for economic development, for jobs, for businesses. So how do you expect to bring about change? How do you expect to have an impact? And I use that word, impact, on the African Americans that you represent or you claim to represent. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What has been happening for the last 40 years or 50 years or even 100 years? is too many African Americans are sitting back waiting for someone else to make things happen for you. It doesn't work that way, folks. You know, Martin Luther King's dream does not encompass any spectator position. It calls for action from each and every one of us. You cannot wish economic development in your community. You cannot wish financial stability in your community. You cannot change your financial condition with wishes. We have systemic discrimination taking place all around us, ladies and gentlemen. And what are we doing to change? You know, I want to tell you something. I don't care how many people tell you that there's not systemic racial discrimination in America. You know, the chickens are starting to come home to roost. If you've watched this program for any length of time, you know about 4 months ago, the American Nurses Association issued a formal apology for systemic discrimination against nurses of color for the last 50 years. The National Association of Realtors in the last 90 days issued a formal apology for systemically discriminating against African Americans in real estate, in the housing market, redlining, steering, doing all of that. And we don't raise a voice. Where are our organizations? Where is our Chester Lewis? Where are the leaders? Where are, you know, I'm reminded that that question that I just asked, I think it was less than 3 weeks ago, that a dear friend of mine, Mary Dean, posed that very same question on a Facebook post. Where are the leaders? I'm not talking about the talkers. I'm not talking about the camera chasers. I'm talking about the leaders that don't mind getting their hands dirty, that don't mind stepping on some toes, that don't mind making somebody uncomfortable. You know, you see, people quote Martin Luther King's speeches, but there's one they don't quote. And it's where he says, there comes a time when you do something not because it's popular. You do it not because you're forced to do it, but you do it because your conscience tells you that it's the right thing to do. And let me just tell you this, you don't have to be a preacher. You don't have to lead a civil rights organization. You don't have to be a sorority person. You don't have to be a politician to pick up the mantle and take a few steps and make a little noise. Oh yeah, listen, don't worry about it. You see, if you're not making somebody uncomfortable, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. But we have got to start using the two main powers that we have, and we don't use them. Now, power number one is your voice. Too many of us are silent or passive or willing to accept almost nothing. You see, there's an old saying, nothing is given to you, especially when you're Black. You have to fight for it. All of the rights that you have gained since 1619, we'll say, okay, you have had to fight for it. Nobody gave you anything. They didn't give you any rights. You see, here we are in 2023, and we have an effort on the part of a lot of politicians trying to take away your rights, trying to reverse the trend. Look at the Voting Rights Act. We took that for granted for years, only to see now in the last 20 years, the Supreme Court and a bunch of Republican politicians suppressing the vote, changing the rules, making it difficult for people of color to vote. Housing. There's still, let me make sure you understand this. There's still a lot of discrimination in housing right now as we speak. Redlining is alive and well. Don't think it's not, ladies and gentlemen. Education. Our young boys and girls are being mistreated, miseducated, or even uneducated every day in the public school system. It's happening. In the workplace, African Americans and other minorities are not paid the same wages that our white co-workers are. You don't get the positions, and you certainly don't get the promotions that your fellow workers, co-workers who don't look like you don't get those. You see, Roland Martin made a point that in this day and age, in 2023, a college graduate makes less money than a high school dropout. Something's wrong with that picture. But we're not using our voice, and we're not using our vote. When it comes to voting, and they're doing everything they can to keep you from voting. And yet we've got people saying, well, it doesn't make any difference. My vote won't count. There's no sense in my vote. Nothing could be further from the truth. If that was the truth, why the heck do you think they're fighting so hard to keep you from voting, to make it difficult for you to vote? You see, folks, we've got a long way to go. Some of you might think that we've come a long way. No, we've got a long way to go. And you know what? For a lot of us, it's a short time to get there. You know? You see, there's not a single one of us that knows when our last day on this earth will be. But we should have in our hearts to make every day count, that the God gives us health and strength and wakes us up every day. It's another day that we've been blessed with. Why can't we use it to make this world a better place than it was when we came in it? You see, all of this is what Roland Martin was sending as a message to everybody that was in that audience, to everybody that watched it or will watch it, because there will be a video. I think the Ministerial League will have the video available sometimes in the very near future. But we've got to be inspired. We cannot take it for granted. We cannot take life for granted. You know, I remember there was a minister at Central Christian Church, Reverend Wood. I used to listen to Reverend Wood on Sunday. And his main message to his parishioners was, God gave us life to have, live abundantly. We live in the richest country on earth. If you don't believe it, go to one of the casinos and look at people that are having fun throwing away money. It's no big thing. And they're laughing while they're doing it. And we're sitting here hollering about, we don't have any money. In the richest country in the world, we have nobody to blame but ourselves. Okay? So I'm telling you what Roland Martin spoke about, the challenges that he issued to everybody in that auditorium and to each and every one of you. Now, what you do with it, what you do about it, that's up to you. But don't keep sitting around waiting for someone else to make your life better. You should be waiting until death do us part. That's my show for today. I'm James Warfield.